Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing the Hindu and the Indian Express for the date 9th of November 2020. Now for your convenience, I have added timestamps in the description, so if you want to skip to a particular news, please use those timestamps. Also, free PDFs for selected topics from this video are available on the Telegram channel, the link to which is in the description. And if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new video that we post. Also, if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. So without wasting your time, let's get started. Now starting with the Hindu, Joe Biden pledges to unite America. So this is what he said in his first address as the official president-electee, right? Then Attorney General stands firm in plea against Jagan Reddy. Center through Attorney General is firm in its stand that they won't be giving the go-ahead to initiate contempt proceedings against Jagan Reddy. But Mr. Venugopal has made it clear that the petitioner, he can directly approach the judges and seek suo motu contempt proceedings. So this is all about it. Then Corps Commander talks were candid, constructive, but nothing actually came out of it. So let us see. Then page 8 editorial, the US vote is about building back better. So there's nothing much in it. Just some points, some overview I'll give you. You can read it. Nothing as such important in it. So it says that the 2020 presidential election has been one of many firsts. Highest ever turnout voters for the winner. Then a woman and woman of color becoming the elected vice president. Then oldest person would be sworn in as the president. And Mr. Trump will be the first US president since 1992 and third elected president since World War II. And only 11th president in US history to lose a re-election bid. So he is again making some records. Then only the second president in history and the first since Benjamin Harrison in 1889 to lose popular vote, yet successfully nominate at least 3 Supreme Court justices. So this is, now even though Trump has lost, he still managed to get 70 million people to back him up. So why did they vote for him? First of all, his stand towards unhinged nativism, that America first, make America great again. So it really resonated with the almost half of the population of the US. Then his politics that was centered around blue collar workers who were getting disenfranchised by the fact that their jobs were being shipped offshore. Then upper classes who were looking for tax breaks. And then the plain white supremacists who nurtured deep hatred of minorities. So these are the people who were basically his followers. Then what have been the consequences of the presidencies of Donald Trump? It has had devastating consequences for liberals in the court, because now we know court has a 6-3 majority of conservatives. The Chief Justice is also leaning towards the conservatism, right? And he also tightened the screws on immigration system. So it will take some time to undo that, right? And he also rejected multilateralism in favor of bilateralism and isolationism. And that has already reshaped global forces. So he got out of Iran nuclear deal, then the International Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and many other treaties he got out of. Then where Trump stumbled, his promises to hollow out the ACA, blowback from China and other nations in response to his tariff maneuvers. Now ACA is America Care Act, which is basically Obamacare, the Healthcare Act. He said that it is very discriminatory and whatnot, but he could not take any action against it. So his promises in the end, they came out to be hollow promises. Then the most important point is, what is the lesson that Team Biden should understand from this? That it should not underestimate or ignore the other side, because still 71 million people voted for Trump to get back in office. That is almost 47 to 48% population of the voters in America. So Team Biden should take lessons, and that is why Biden said, even though I'm a Democrat, I will be a president of all Americans. So this is about it. Then this one, turning the spotlight on America's election custodian. So this is basically about the Federal Election Commission and its mild comparison with the Election Commission of India. So let us see. So first of all, this person gives a background about ECI, the Election Commission of India. And he says that in our Constituent Assembly, the constitutional forefathers, they had enormous debates about the Election Commission of India, and they gave it enormous powers to be exercised during the course of elections, strictly on other election related matters. So this is an all powerful body when it comes to elections, and by virtue of being the custodian of electoral roll, all matters which are connected with this fall within ECI's domain. Now it has vast powers that during the election process, even the higher judiciary does not interfere in the election processes of the country. Such are the powers that have been given to the ECI for conducting elections, right? Now Making a comparison, he says the Federal Election Commission has a much narrower mandate than ECI. It was basically made to check campaign finance issues, and it is fairly a recent body. It was just established in 1975. As a watchdog, it was meant to disclose campaign finance information, enforce the law regarding campaign contributions, and oversee public funding of the presidential election. Now its composition of FEC, so it is basically a 6-member body, right? The 6 posts of commissioners are supposed to be equally shared by Democrats and Republicans, and that to have been confirmed by the Senate. Now, if you compare that to the Election Commission of India, at present it is a 3-member body. Its membership has changed over time, it is not fixed. And number 2, there are no political appointees within the Election Commission of India. But here you see in the Federal Election Commission, 3 members are from the Democrats and 3 are from the Republicans. And that is what really creates a problem, because functioning is hampered by political divide. Now in 2020, which was a very crucial year for elections, there were huge vacancies. The commission has effectively not passed any orders since August 2019 because of lack of quorum, for which at least 4 members are needed. So they don't even have 4 members to actually take a decision. Several hundred matters lie pending before the commission. Now, lack of confidence. So Trump not even once mentioned that he'll be complaining to the Federal Election Commission. He was directly preferring the Supreme Court. So that is the level of confidence they have in their election commission, right? But if you compare that to our constitution, so our constitution's fathers decided to limit the role of judiciary in India just to the post-election period, because during the election period, you don't see courts intervening. Had that been the case, the process of election would not have gone ahead and there would have been many delays in the results. So that is why they did not give the judiciary that role. The founding fathers were clear that if election relations petitions were entertained during the course of election process, it would impede the process and delay election results. So that is what I told you. Now, he also makes a case for widening postal ballot system. Right now, we do have postal ballot system, but it is only limited to a few categories of largely government staff, for example, those on election duty, as well as members of the armed forces, police or armed forces. Now, he says we need to widen this base to include all senior citizens and anyone else who may find it convenient to cast their vote early. For example, the physically handicapped and other such categories of people could be included in this category. And then he gives an example that, for example, when the Jawans, they cast their vote, it takes almost 2 days, and at times it reaches the counting station 2 days after the counting has concluded. So that basically invalidates their votes. So this is what he's saying. So these are all the things that you need to know from this editorial. Then India and Biden. So some points about what Biden's presidency would mean for our foreign policy and also our domestic politics. So let us see. So Mr. Biden's presidency promises a change in leadership style, because Mr. Trump was all one-man army sort of person. Now there would be broader powers to advisors and process-driven decisions. There would be US's return to Paris Climate Accord, which would help our energy transformation. If you remember, I told you US had promised us money and technology, but since it pulled out of it, we did not get it. Now we can hope to get it. Then a return to Iran nuclear negotiations. This would also mean good news for us. Why? Because of our connectivity ambitions. Just in yesterday's video, we discussed about the Chabahar project, right? He's unlikely to reverse the Afghan pullout. Instead, might make it a more measured exit. So exit is going to be for sure. Let us see if he involves us in the Afghan process. On China, he's likely to adopt a less confrontational attitude while maintaining a pushback. So let us see if America dials down its rhetoric on China and what that means in terms of Quad and its assistance towards India. And his belief in building up US traditional transatlantic and trans-Pacific alliances might be at odds with America's more transactional trends. But then again, he would be focusing more on trans-Pacific alliances because he was the vice president under Mr. Obama, and Obama was the one who basically started this whole pivot to Asia process, right? So we can expect that at least when it comes to Quad, the process would be going strong. So these are all the points from that one. Then on page 9, COVID-19 climate and carbon neutrality. So this is by Mr. Jairam Ramesh. He's making some good points. So he starts by telling that there is wide body of evidence that indicates that loss of biodiversity and human intrusion has made us more vulnerable to pandemics. Now he says that we should focus on 3 E's to understand potential pandemics in future. And those 3 E's are ecology, environment, and evolution. And he says then COVID-19 has again highlighted the need for greater emphasis on biosciences. So these are the points he's making. Then he says that pollution has an impact on COVID-19. We discussed yesterday or day before yesterday the report by Health Ministry to a parliamentary panel where they said that this air pollution might aggravate this COVID-19 problem, right? And then overall, all forms of pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, water pollution, they take a toll on public and general health, which is very true. Now he says the traditional grow now and pay later model is not only sustainable in the medium to long term, but also dangerous to public health in the short term. So we can't take the same strategy or trajectory of growth as the industrial nations did, because when they grew, they had an unhinged growth because there was no problem of pollution and no international body to check it. Now we have the moral obligation. So we need to have a different approach. We cannot go for this grow now and pay later. Now he's also talking about a report of the Ministry of Earth Sciences called Assessment of Climate Change over the Indian region. Now here are some interesting points. This report points to the need for making our future science and technology strategies in areas anchored in an understanding of the impacts of climate change caused by continued emission of greenhouse gases. So this is a generic statement. Now it is a very peculiar observation that we started using HCFCs to arrest ozone hole, right? And we were successful, but then it had an unintended consequence that it has led to an increase in global warming. Why? Because HCFCs have 1,000 times more greenhouse gas potential than CO2. So for per unit volume of CO2 and per unit volume of HCFC would cause 1,000 times more greenhouse gas effect. So this is the danger. Though it did provide a solution to ozone hole, but that has been largely repaired. So we need next generations, and we have halons and other technologies, but then again, the developed countries have them and they are not ready to transfer the patents. Then he's also talking about carbon neutrality. Now what is carbon neutrality? It should mean that for a country, carbon emissions are equal to absorption in carbon sinks plus offsets. I'll just show you. So you can envisage carbon neutrality like this. See, these are the emissions, and then we go for afforestation, then green technologies. So overall, we're trying to maintain a balance. If you remember, I've told you earlier as well, carbon neutrality does not mean zero carbon. It means net zero carbon, right? So basically what you do, existing emissions you reduce, then you invest in offsets. Offsets are renewable energy. Then you could be investing in projects in some other countries from which you get carbon credits. So in all, the sum of these two, your emissions plus offsets is zero, and that is how you become carbon neutral. So Mr. Ramesh tells us that California, which is a state in US but the fifth largest economy in the world, has promised to go carbon neutral by 2045, EU by 2050, China, South Korea and Japan. We've discussed these things, right? So he says now India should also aim to do so because it is high time. We cannot go for grow now and pay later approach. So these are the things that he's telling in this editorial. Then this one, strategic comfort with the Maldives. So this is about the India-Maldives relations, the latest developments under Mr. Soli, right? So what happened? Our Foreign Secretary, Mr. Harsh Vardhan Shringla, he was on a visit to Maldives. So that is why we are talking about it. So let us see. So first he says that under Maldivian President Ibrahim Soli, our bilateral cooperation, especially in the economic front, has really increased and it has matured. Now, giving a background of the Indian-Maldives bilateral relations. So we've had relations for centuries. Now, technology has made connectivity easier and everyday contact and exchanges more frequent, right? India is a destination for Maldivian students and medical tourism from the Maldives because we have the expertise in that, right? And we have also extended a liberal visa regime for the people of Maldives. On the other hand, Maldives is a major tourist destination for Indians and also a job destination for some. India has also exempted Maldives from export curbs on essential commodities. So you see, we have very close relationship, and Maldives is very, very important for us strategically as well because it is an important island in the Indian Ocean region, and we want to check China there because China is also trying to make inroads, right, under its string of pearls policy. Now then he tells us about India's emergency assistance to the Maldives. So two big examples. Number one, in 1988, under Operation Cactus. So there was a attempted coup against the then president Abdul Gayoom. Indian paramilitary and navy was sent to thwart this coup, right? Then again in 2004, after the tsunami, there was drinking water crisis. Then again we sent our naval ships to provide drinking water to this island nation. Now, talking about the assistance that we have extended during the COVID period, we have given them $250 million aid. We have provided them with medical supplies. We have started a new cargo ferry system, and we have also started a new air travel bubble exclusively for the Maldives, right? Now, there have been some protests by this person called Yamin. He is ex-president, right? And he's pro-China. So they have been running this camp India out because they are being funded by China, right? And what is the concern for us? That the ruling party, this person, Mr. Nasheed, he was the first elected president of multi-party democracy in the Maldives, right? Right now he's the speaker of the assembly in the Maldives, and he's also the party leader, of which Mr. Soli also belongs, and Mr. Soli is the president. Now they have had some problems lately, some public spats and some frictions. So this could become a matter of concern for India because Mr. Nasheed is very, very close to us, but Mr. Soli is also working closely with us. So we don't want to choose. So this is a concern, and this we need to iron out. So this is all this editorial is telling us. Then on page 10, plea on draft West Ghat notification. So let this notification become solid. Then we'll be discussing about whole Western Ghats, how they are ecologically sensitive, what is their ecological importance, how many states do they run across, basically 6 states, right? Then we'll also be discussing about Madhav Gadgil committee and K. Kasturi Rangan committee. Then we'll also see their proposals regarding go zones and no go zones, the zonation in color coding. We'll be discussing everything. Let the proper guidelines come out, right? Till then, let us see what this problem is. So a Kerala-based NGO for farmers moved to the Supreme Court on Sunday to declare unconstitutional a draft notification of the center demarcating 56,825 kilometers spread over 6 states as the Western Ghats ecologically sensitive area. So here important point for you is that Western Ghats, they span over 6 states. So this is your homework. You should go back and check your atlas and see Western Ghats and what all states do they run across. So they say that this draft notification covered Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So these are the states from where the Western Ghat is going. Please make it a point that you check your atlas. The petition has sought a direction to the government not to implement the Madhav Gadgil and K. Kasturarangan committee's report on the conservation of Western Ghats and the demarcation of no-go zones. Now why are they saying so? Because the draft notification declares 123 agricultural villages in Kerala as ecologically sensitive area villages, and the recommendations based on the Kasturi Rangan report on land use, farm practices, animal husbandry, forestry, industries, infrastructure development would convert the semi-urban villages into forests with no facilities and roads. So these are the problems that they are saying. Again, let this concrete guideline come out. We'll be discussing these things in detail, right? Then just an example of ecological conservation. Finally, great banyan tree breathes afresh. There's nothing scientific or rocket science here, but please make it a point that you read this, right? Then just the headlines. Biden may relax curbs on H-1B visa, job-based visas, because he had promised in his pre-election manifestos of sort, and he has made such declarations. So let us see when and how he does it, because like we discussed in the editorial, there are now 2 Americas, right? One which is favoring Mr. Trump and the other Mr. Biden. Now he has to strike a balance between the two because the condition is somewhat sensitive there. Then experts want more US action on climate. So this is again about the return of America to the Paris Treaty. We've been discussing day before yesterday, we discussed in the video the Paris Treaty, right? So they would want more inclusion and more efforts from the US for this, right? Nothing to basically read there. Then again, all about US elections, what Iran is saying, next US government must make up for past mistakes, right? So nothing substantial. As Myanmar goes to polls, Suu Kyi is expected to win. So Myanmar is going to polls, and yes, Suu Kyi will be winning the elections, but then she is facing problems from the military junta because the constitution under which elections are happening and the present constitution of the Myanmar gives exceptional sweeping powers to the military junta, right? So this is what this is saying. Then the Indian Express, unfortunate news, officer among 4 security personnel killed in LOC gunfight. Pakistan, they never mend their ways. So this is where this is happening, Machil sector. Basically this LOC gunfights, they happen because Pakistan opens fire to give cover to infiltrators. Then winter here, no thaw in India China talks, another round soon. So we saw that in the Hindu as well. Then page 5, shipping ministry to be renamed. So the Ministry of Shipping will be renamed to Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways to bring more clarity in the work it does. So you can use this in your PT, right? So PM was speaking at the inauguration of RoPax ferry service between Hazira in Surat and Gogha in Bhavnagar district on Sunday. So again, for your PT and also for your GS paper 3 infrastructure, right? The modes of communication. So this is waterway, and Government of India has been paying attention to waterways. Why? Because waterways are safer than roadways, number one, and they consume less fuel. It saves costs, right? And it also is less polluting. So those are the advantages of waterways. So that is why Government of India is pushing to revive or to make them popular. Another advantage of using waterways, especially if you transfer the freight through waterways, is that it would also lead to less congestion. So these are the reasons why they are pushing for waterways. So this service was launched in Gujarat. The ferry service is slated to reduce the distance between Surat and Gogha from 375 kilometers to 90 kilometers and reduce the travel time of 10 to 12 hours to 4 hours. Now, Mr. Modi added that to become Atmanirbhar, it is important to boost the blue economy and strengthen sea-based logistics, because in our economy, the maximum burden of expenditure is on logistics. So he's making a very important point. With water transport, cost of logistics can be substantially reduced. Like I told you, less cost in terms of fuel consumption, right? Less congestion. So this leads to less cost. So in fact, if you were to cover airways, roadways, railways and waterways on per kilometer basis, waterways would come out to be the cheapest. So that is the importance of waterways, right? Then page 6, AG we've discussed. Uttarakhand weighs denotifying elephant reserve. So Uttarakhand government is considering denotifying the Shivalik Elephant Reserve. Now about elephant reserves, they have no legal sanctity. Please pay attention. Tiger reserves have legal sanctity, but elephant reserves do not have any legal sanctity. So this is a point again for your PT, right? If the board gives an in-principle approval, a detailed proposal will be taken up. The matter communicated to the Ministry of Forest and Climate Change. Now, elephant forest has no legal sanctity. Shivalik Elephant Reserve, spread over 5,000 square kilometer, was notified in 2002. Another official said that an elephant reserve is unlike a tiger reserve, where there are certain restrictions and provisions of punishment for violating them. So tigers have very high degree of protection. Certain formalities for obtaining clearances for development work will get reduced after denotification. That is the only thing. But the larger issue here is of the Jolly Grant Airport in Dehradun. So they are trying to take away the status or denotifying it so that they can carry out construction activities which are spilling into this elephant reserve. So that is the real reason. So the MOEF last month asked the Uttarakhand government to consider avoiding sensitive areas of Shivalik Elephant Reserve while exploring land for expansion of the airport. The Forest Conservation Division of MOEF has made the observation in response to state government proposal for diversion of 87 hectares of forest land for the project. So because MOEF was not diverting that land, so what they are doing now, they are trying to denotify it. Once they denotify, they won't need to seek any permission from MOEF and they can go ahead with this construction. Then there's this news, cadre merger of officers, railway considers selection panel for top posts. So this is not important for you for your examination per se, but if you're interested in how bureaucracy works, then you can read it. This is basically that there are some posts which are known as ex-cadre posts for which anyone can compete. So basically railways have recruitment from different streams. One is from UPSC, right? The IAS paper that you all are aspiring for. Other is from engineering services and other places, right? So they all converge and ultimately they all stream into one, right? And then they compete with each other for promotions. Now the persons who come from UPSC, they are always crying because their age is older as compared to the candidates coming from other streams. So they say as it is difficult for them to reach higher positions within the railway services, right? So there was a proposal of integrating all the railway services into one known as Indian Railway Management Services and then going for their promotions, transfers, etc. So there is a controversy, sort of controversy about this. You really don't need to get into this. Then page 11, the ideas page, the good fix. Very, very important, very, very good article. It is about hidden hunger and how to solve that problem. Beautifully written. We'll be discussing this, and please make sure that you save this because this is important for your GS paper 3. It is one of those rare articles which combine current affairs with your static part. As a matter of fact, this is more of your static part and it deals with the concept of hidden hunger. So let us see what they are saying. So addressing the problem of hidden hunger. First of all, what is hidden hunger? It is the lack of vitamins and minerals in your diet. Basically, micronutrient deficiency is hidden hunger. So there could be a case where you are getting enough calories, the quantity you are getting, but not the quality in terms of micronutrients, and that leads to hidden hunger. It occurs when the quality of food people eat does not meet their nutrient requirements. Food is deficient in micronutrients such as vitamins and minerals that they need for their growth and development. Now, what is the current state of this problem? Almost 2 billion women and children in low and middle income countries are at risk of vitamin A, iron, zinc deficiencies leading to more sickness, increased number of deaths and lower cognitive ability, all combining to reduce economic growth significantly. If you remember, yesterday also we discussed about rice fortification scheme of government, and we have also discussed it earlier as well. And we also discussed about iron acid, folic acid, supplementation tablets, right? So we are trying through government schemes to basically provide micronutrients to the vulnerable sections, the poor people, right? And micronutrients are very, very important. They are as important as macronutrients, because if you don't get proper micronutrients, your body is not able to absorb the macronutrients, that is the carbs, proteins and fats properly if there is lack of micronutrient. Then there are many hormones that work in conjunction with different micronutrients. Again, if these micronutrients are not there, your body would not be functioning properly. Again, it hampers your cognitive growth because the lack of micronutrients hinders the development of your brain. So that is why the access to micronutrients is very, very important. So for example, you are born in a poor family and your parents have poor cognitive skills, and because of deficiency of micronutrients, you also inherit those poor cognitive skills. So this becomes a vicious cycle. So that is why it needs to be broken. Now, what is the reason for this? Low quality diet, just we saw, right? Now he says that the poor people, they desire but they cannot afford to purchase sufficient quantities of vegetables, fruits, pulses and animal products which have relatively high amounts of bioavailable minerals and vitamins. It is true, but whose prices have been rising much faster than staples like wheat, rice, corn over the past several decades. So this is the problem. Low quality diet. Why? Because of affordability issues. They cannot afford the non-staple foods because of high prices. So that is what he's saying. Poor have just two choices. Either go for staple grain, but staple grains are poor in micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, and also major macronutrient like protein. So mostly these things, wheat, rice, corn, they are high in carbohydrates but very, very poor in proteins. And again, protein is very, very important for your body. It is the building block of your body. So this is the problem. Now the other choice is non-staple, which includes fruits, vegetables and animal products and pulses. But these poor people, they cannot afford non-staple because of their high prices, right? Now what could be the solution to this problem? We saw what is hidden hunger, why there is hidden hunger, why poor suffer from it. Now what could be the solutions, especially for the poor? So number one, increase the micronutrients in staple grains consumed by the poor, because you cannot promise affordability. So this is a better approach. And number two, increase the consumption of nutritious non-staple. Now this is a long shot. First, let us look at this. So about increasing the micronutrients in staple grains consumed by the poor, you go for biofortification. Biofortification is method by which you increase micronutrients or specific nutrients in crops. And in that, Indian agricultural research institutes have already made strides. So they need to be lauded for their efforts. And recently PM Modi, he dedicated 8 micro-fortified crops to the nation, 17 varieties of 8 crops. So you should find out what those 8 crops are, right? Second, you just don't need to biofortify these staples. You also have to ensure that they are available for the poor to consume. So you need to link these biofortified staples to the PDS midday meal scheme Poshan, ICDS, etc. So that all these schemes, the grains that they are getting are biofortified, right? Then he's also talking about the fertilizer strategy for biofortified crops. So what are the fertilizer strategies? So research has shown that nitrogenous fertilizers increase the density of proteins, minerals and vitamins in staple foods, all of the things that they are lacking. So if you use nitrogenous fertilizer, they increase these things. Number 2, adding zinc or iodine to fertilizers and foliar sprays will also increase the zinc and iodine density in the grains. So not only biofortification, you also have to ensure that they are available to the poor by linking them to the schemes, and you also have to use fertilizer strategies for biofortified crops to further enhance their vitamin and mineral content by using nitrogenous fertilizer and adding zinc or iodine. So very good examples. Now we come to the second part of the solution, that is increase the consumption of nutritious non-staple. So for that we need to increase the supply, but it cannot happen out of thin air. So we have to make them cost effective through policy and public investment, right? But at the same time, we should also keep in mind to reduce prices while catering to dietary diversity, because different people and regions have different diversity and choices. So we have to pay attention to that as well. And then they say that we need a similar push to Operation Flood, because India was very poor in milk production, but then we undertook this massive Operation Flood and we became a major milk exporter in the world. So we need a similar push in India for fruits, vegetables and pulses. And if you remember, we discussed Kisan Rail. It is one of the methods for doing that only, so that there are no post-harvest losses or very minimal post-harvest losses, right? And then again, farm bills, they would also help in these things. So these are the methods by which you can increase the consumption. So 2 solutions. Number 1, increasing the content of micronutrients in the staples. So we saw biofortification, then linking them with the schemes, and also use of fertilizer strategy. And second is increasing consumption through cost effective policy and public investment, catering to dietary diversity and all that. Now what is biofortification? I have already explained. You can read that. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel. Also press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos, and please give us a thumbs up if you liked our videos. Also connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone, and please connect with us on our Telegram page where you can access the PDFs of the videos that I'll be posting daily, right? So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.